The marble floors of the Manhattan penthouse gleamed under crystal chandeliers, but Elena Martinez couldn't see their beauty anymore. All she could see was her husband of 12 years, Marcus Blackwood, with his secretary draped across his lap in what used to be their favorite reading chair. The champagne glass slipped from Elena's trembling fingers, shattering against the imported Italian stone, much like her world had just shattered before her eyes. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Elena had always believed in fairy tales. Growing up in a modest household in Queens, where her mother worked double shifts as a nurse and her father drove a taxi 16 hours a day, she dreamed of a life where money wasn't a constant worry, where love meant security, and security meant never having to choose between paying rent or buying groceries. When she met Marcus Blackwood at Columbia University, it felt like destiny had finally smiled upon her. He was everything she wasn't. Old money, established family name, connections that opened doors before he even knocked. Elena was studying literature on a full scholarship, working 3 part-time jobs to cover her living expenses, while Marcus glided through his MBA program with the casual confidence of someone who knew his future was already secured. Their courtship was a whirlwind of expensive restaurants, weekend trips to the Hamptons, and galas where Elena felt like Cinderella at the ball. Marcus would introduce her as his brilliant girlfriend, always emphasizing her academic achievements, her sharp mind, her ability to discuss Proust and Hemingway with equal passion. She thought he loved her intellect, her authenticity in a world of pretense. The wedding was everything Elena had ever dreamed of: a sprawling estate in Connecticut, 500 guests, a dress that cost more than her parents' annual income. Marcus's family tolerated her with polite smiles and backhanded compliments about how refreshing it was to have someone so down-to-earth joining their circle. Elena chose to see acceptance where there was merely resignation. For the first few years, their marriage seemed perfect from the outside. Marcus established his own investment firm with seed money from his trust fund, while Elena abandoned her dreams of becoming a literature professor to become the perfect society wife. She learned to navigate charity committees, organize fundraising galas, and smile graciously while other wives made subtle digs about her humble beginnings. Elena threw herself into supporting Marcus's career with the same dedication she had once reserved for her study. She hosted dinner parties for potential clients, remembering everyone's preferences, their children's names, their business interests. She became Marcus's secret weapon, the warm, intelligent woman who could make anyone feel comfortable while subtly steering conversations toward business opportunities. The Blackwood Investment Group flourished. Marcus's client roster grew from his father's old golf buddies to major corporations and high-net-worth individuals. Elena stood beside him at awards ceremonies, smiling proudly as he accepted recognition for Emerging Entrepreneur of the Year and Financial Advisor Excellence Award. She never mentioned how many late nights she spent researching his clients' interests, preparing talking points, or how she'd given up her own career aspirations to become his full-time support system. Their penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side became a showcase of their success. Elena had impeccable taste and Marcus had unlimited funds. Every piece of furniture was carefully selected, every artwork professionally curated. Their dinner parties became legendary among New York's financial elite. Elena's attention to detail was flawless, from the handwritten place cards to the perfectly paired wine selections. But success brought new pressures. Marcus began working longer hours, traveling more frequently. Elena found herself spending evenings alone in their beautiful home, reading the literature she'd once hoped to teach, wondering when they'd stop talking about anything meaningful. When she brought up the possibility of having children or perhaps returning to her academic pursuits, Marcus would wave off her concerns with promises of next year or when things settle down. The changes were gradual. Marcus became more critical, more demanding. The woman who had once charmed him with her genuine enthusiasm now irritated him with what he called her overthinking. Her questions about his day, once welcomed as caring interest, became nagging. Her suggestions for their social calendar were dismissed as her not understanding how business really works. Elena began to shrink into herself, second-guessing every word, every gesture. She stopped sharing her thoughts about books, stopped suggesting they take weekend trips together, stopped asking about his feelings. Instead, she perfected the art of being invisible while indispensable, anticipating his needs before he voiced them, solving problems before he knew they existed, maintaining their social calendar and household with silent efficiency. The loneliness was crushing, but Elena told herself this was temporary. All marriages went through difficult phases. Marcus was under pressure from expanding the business. His father had recently passed away, leaving complicated family dynamics and financial obligations. She just needed to be more patient, more understanding, more supportive. Then came Vanessa Sterling. Marcus hired her as his executive assistant, describing her as exactly what the firm needs to reach the next level. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. She enrolled in online courses through Columbia's continuing education program, using her small savings to pay for classes in business administration and financial planning. Her professors were impressed by her insights, her ability to connect theoretical concepts to real-world applications. Elena realized she'd been getting an informal education in high-stakes finance for over a decade. She'd just never had the confidence to recognize her own expertise. Meanwhile, Marcus and Vanessa's relationship played out in the society pages. Their engagement announcement appeared in the New York Times, 6 months after the divorce was finalized. The wedding was planned for the following spring at the same Connecticut estate where Elena had once believed she was beginning her own fairy tale. Elena watched their social media posts with a mixture of pain and fascination. Vanessa had seamlessly stepped into the role Elena had vacated, hosting the same dinner parties, attending the same charity events, even wearing similar styles of clothing. It was as if Elena had been completely erased and replaced with an updated model. But something else was happening in those posts that Marcus and Vanessa seemed oblivious to. Elena's trained eye, sharpened by years of managing their social calendar and business relationships, could see cracks forming. Clients who had once been loyal to Marcus were conspicuously absent from recent events. Business partnerships that Elena had carefully cultivated were quietly dissolving. Elena realized that Marcus had made a crucial error. He'd assumed his success was entirely his own creation. He'd never recognized how much of his business development had depended on Elena's relationship-building skills, her emotional intelligence, her ability to make people feel valued and understood. Vanessa might speak the language of finance fluently, but she lacked the warmth and genuine interest in others that had made Elena so effective. The revelations sparked something dangerous in Elena, not just anger but recognition of her own power. She began reaching out to former contacts, not as Marcus's ex-wife seeking sympathy, but as Elena Martinez, a woman with her own expertise and insights to offer. Dr. Patricia Chen, a prominent psychiatrist who had been a regular at their dinner parties, was the first to respond. She'd always found Elena more interesting than Marcus, more genuine in her curiosity about people's lives and motivations. Over coffee, Patricia mentioned her frustration with financial advisors who didn't understand the unique needs of medical professionals. Elena found herself naturally falling into the role she'd played for years, but this time for her own benefit. She listened carefully to Patricia's concerns, asked probing questions about her colleagues' experiences, and suggested solutions based on her understanding of both personal finance and professional psychology. By the end of their meeting, Patricia had not only agreed to let Elena handle her investment portfolio, but had promised to refer other physicians. The next breakthrough came through Carmen Rodriguez, a former museum board member who had started a successful consulting firm. Carmen had always respected Elena's organizational abilities and strategic thinking. She offered Elena a part-time position, helping to develop client relationships, recognizing that Elena's networking skills were exactly what her growing company needed. Working with Carmen was a revelation. Elena discovered that her years of managing Marcus's business relationships had taught her more about client development and strategic planning than many people learned in formal business programs. She had an intuitive understanding of what made people trust each other, how to identify decision-makers in complex organizations, and how to position solutions in ways that resonated with different personality types. Within 6 months, Elena had helped Carmen's firm land 3 major contracts, including one with a prestigious law firm that had previously been unresponsive to their pitches. Elena's approach was different from the aggressive sales tactics most consultants used. She focused on building genuine relationships, understanding each client's unique challenges, and presenting solutions that addressed both stated and unstated needs. Carmen was so impressed that she offered Elena a full-time position as Director of Client Relations, with equity in the growing company. For the first time in over a decade, Elena had a job title that reflected her actual contributions rather than her marital status. But Elena had bigger plans. The financial courses she'd been taking had given her confidence in her ability to understand complex investment strategies. Her years of observing Marcus's business had taught her about market dynamics and client psychology. Her recent successes with Patricia and Carmen had proven she could build her own professional relationships. Most importantly, she'd learned something that Marcus never had, that true success in finance wasn't just about numbers and strategies, but about understanding people. Elena had spent years studying the wealthy clients who had frequented their home, learning their fears, their motivations, their blind spots. She knew what kept them awake at night, what they valued beyond money, and what they would pay premium fees to achieve. Elena began planning her own financial consulting firm, one that would specialize in working with high-net-worth individuals who had been underserved by traditional investment firms. She would target successful women, entrepreneurs, executives, and professionals who had money but lacked the old boy networks that dominated traditional finance. The irony wasn't lost on her. Marcus had unknowingly trained her to be his competition, and she was about to become very good at it. As Elena refined her business plan in the quiet evenings of her Brooklyn apartment, she thought about revenge, not the petty kind that involved damaging property or spreading gossip, but the kind that would prove Marcus had made the biggest mistake of his life. She was going to succeed spectacularly, and she was going to do it by being everything he had never recognized her to be: brilliant, ambitious, and utterly unstoppable. 18 months after her divorce, Elena Martinez walked into the glass towers of Midtown Manhattan, wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than her monthly rent used to be. But this time, she'd earned every thread of it herself. Martinez Wealth Management had started in her Brooklyn apartment, with 3 clients and a borrowed desk. Now it occupied a full floor in a prestigious building, employed 12 specialists, and managed over $200 million in assets. Elena had discovered something that surprised even her. She wasn't just good at wealth management, she was exceptional at it. Her approach revolutionized how financial services were delivered to her target market. While traditional firms treated wealthy women as secondary decision-makers or widows to be managed, Elena recognized them as the sophisticated investors they were. She created investment strategies that accounted for career interruptions, longer lifespans, and different risk tolerances. She offered financial education seminars that were actually educational rather than thinly disguised sales pitches. Word spread quickly through New York's professional women's networks. Dr. Patricia Chen had referred not just her physician colleagues, but their spouses. Carmen Rodriguez's business partners became clients, then referred to their own networks. Elena's client roster grew to include federal judges, tech entrepreneurs, media executives, and investment bankers, women who controlled significant wealth but had been overlooked by male-dominated financial firms. The financial press took notice. Forbes featured Elena in their 30 under 40 list, despite her being 39. The Wall Street Journal profiled her innovative approach to client relations. Bloomberg interviewed her about trends in wealth management for professional women. Each article brought new clients, new opportunities, and new recognition. But success brought unexpected challenges. Elena's rising profile meant she was increasingly visible in the same social circles where Marcus operated. At charity galas and business conferences, she could feel eyes tracking her movements, whispered conversations stopping when she approached, the subtle tension that comes when someone refuses to stay in their assigned place. The first direct confrontation came at the Museum of Modern Art's annual fundraising gala. Elena attended as a sponsor. Her firm had purchased a table as part of their marketing strategy. She arrived alone, confident in an emerald green gown that complemented her dark hair and emphasized the poise she'd developed over the past 2 years. Marcus was there with Vanessa, now his wife of 6 months. Elena watched them work the room with the same practiced efficiency she remembered from their own marriage. Vanessa had mastered the art of the supportive spouse, though Elena noticed she lacked the genuine warmth that had made Elena effective in the role. Their encounter was inevitable. Marcus approached her during the cocktail hour, Vanessa trailing behind with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Elena, you look successful," Marcus said, his tone carefully neutral but his eyes calculating. He'd clearly been keeping track of her rising profile. "Thank you, Marcus. Marriage suits you," Elena replied, nodding politely to Vanessa. She'd learned to weaponize graciousness. Her calm confidence was more unsettling than any dramatic confrontation would have been. "I heard about your little business venture," Vanessa interjected, the word little delivered with surgical precision. "How charming that you're finally pursuing your own interests." Elena smiled serenely. "Yes, it's been quite rewarding. We just closed our largest client acquisition last week, a technology executive whose portfolio we'll be managing. $42 million. Sometimes focusing on underserved markets pays off beautifully." She watched Marcus's jaw tighten slightly. $42 million was more than his firm typically managed for individual clients. Elena excused herself gracefully, leaving them to process the implications of her success. But Elena's true revenge was already in motion. And it was far more sophisticated than social one-upmanship. She had been systematically identifying and approaching Marcus's most valuable clients, not to steal them through underhanded tactics, but to offer them services that Blackwood Investment Group simply couldn't match. Her first major acquisition was Jennifer Walsh, the CEO of a biotechnology company, who had grown frustrated with Marcus's condescending attitude and outdated investment strategies. Jennifer had built her company from a laboratory startup to a billion-dollar enterprise, but Marcus still treated her like she needed basic financial concepts explained to her. Elena's approach was different. She spent hours understanding Jennifer's business, her industry's unique challenges, and her personal financial goals. She created an investment strategy that accounted for the volatility of biotech stocks, the importance of regulatory approval timelines, and Jennifer's plans for eventual company succession. Within 6 months, Elena had increased Jennifer's portfolio performance by 18%, while reducing her risk exposure. Jennifer's defection sent shockwaves through Marcus's client base. If someone as successful and sophisticated as Jennifer Walsh had switched to Elena's firm, perhaps they should reconsider their own relationships with Blackwood Investment Group. The exodus accelerated when Elena hired David Kim, Marcus's former head of research. David had grown tired of Marcus's increasingly erratic behavior and Vanessa's attempts to micromanage departments she didn't understand. Elena offered him not just a higher salary, but equity in her growing firm and the opportunity to implement investment strategies that Marcus had consistently rejected as too innovative. With David's expertise and Elena's relationship-building skills, Martinez Wealth Management began offering services that set new industry standards. They provided quarterly educational seminars where clients could learn about market trends without being subjected to sales presentations. They created personalized financial education programs for clients' children. They offered estate planning services that accounted for changing family dynamics and evolving tax laws. Most importantly, Elena insisted that every client interaction be treated as a partnership rather than a transaction. Her team was trained to listen more than they spoke, to ask questions that revealed underlying concerns, and to provide solutions that addressed clients' actual needs rather than the firm's sales targets. The results were undeniable. Martinez Wealth Management's client retention rate was 97%, compared to the industry average of 72%. Their clients' average portfolio performance exceeded market benchmarks by 12%. Their referral rate was so high that Elena had to implement a waiting list for new clients. Meanwhile, Blackwood Investment Group was hemorrhaging both clients and employees. Marcus's aggressive attempts to retain departing clients backfired, making him appear desperate rather than confident. Vanessa's efforts to modernize their marketing alienated long-term clients while failing to attract new ones. Their office atmosphere became toxic as Marcus blamed everyone except himself for their declining performance. The final blow came during the annual Financial Excellence Awards ceremony. Elena's firm won Innovation in Client Services and Fastest-Growing Wealth Management Firm. She accepted the awards wearing a midnight blue gown that made her look like the successful executive she'd become, not the society wife she'd once been. In her acceptance speech, Elena thanked her team, her clients, and everyone who believed in second chances and new beginnings. She didn't mention Marcus by name, but everyone in the industry knew the story of her rise from society divorce to financial powerhouse. Marcus watched from his table near the back of the ballroom, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Vanessa sat beside him, her earlier confidence replaced by the dawning realization that she'd helped destroy the man she'd married. Blackwood Investment Group was failing. Their marriage was strained by financial pressure and public embarrassment, and the woman they'd both dismissed as irrelevant had become their most successful competitor. As Elena left the stage, she caught Marcus's eye across the crowded ballroom. She didn't smile triumphantly or acknowledge him with any gesture of victory. She simply looked at him with the same polite indifference she might show a stranger, then turned away to accept congratulations from her peers. That indifference was her greatest revenge, proving that Marcus Blackwood, the man who had once been the center of her universe, was now completely irrelevant to her success. Elena had not just survived his betrayal, she had used it as fuel to become someone far more powerful than she'd ever been as his wife. The girl from Queens who had once dreamed of security had built an empire. The woman who had sacrificed her own ambitions for someone else's success had discovered ambitions she never knew she possessed. The betrayed wife had transformed into something her ex-husband could never have imagined, his superior in every way that mattered. Elena Martinez had won the ultimate victory. She no longer needed revenge because she no longer cared enough to want it. 3 years after that awards ceremony, Elena stood in her corner office, overlooking Central Park, reviewing the quarterly reports that would cement her position as one of New York's most influential financial advisors. Martinez Wealth Management now employed 43 people across 3 offices, managed over $800 million in assets, and had a waiting list of potential clients that stretched 6 months. The transformation of her personal life had been equally dramatic. Elena had purchased a penthouse in Tribeca, not to compete with her former lifestyle, but because she genuinely loved the neighborhood's artistic energy and historic architecture. She'd furnished it with pieces she chose herself, artwork from emerging artists she discovered during weekend gallery walks, and books that filled custom-built shelves from floor to ceiling. Her social circle had evolved organically around shared interests rather than business obligations. Elena's closest friends included Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned surgeon she'd met through Patricia's referrals, Alexander Reeves, a federal judge whose investment strategy Elena had crafted, and Marcus Thompson, a documentary filmmaker whose projects Elena had helped finance through her venture capital connections. These relationships were built on mutual respect and genuine affection, concepts that felt revolutionary after years of transactional social interactions. Elena had also reconnected with her family in ways that prosperity allowed. She'd paid off her parents' mortgage in Queens, funded her younger brother's law school education, and established a scholarship at Columbia for first-generation college students studying literature. The little girl who had once dreamed of escaping her circumstances now found deep satisfaction in helping others overcome similar barriers. The financial press had taken notice of Elena's unconventional methods and spectacular results. Harvard Business School invited her to guest lecture on relationship-driven investment strategies. She'd been featured on the cover of Fortune magazine as one of America's most innovative financial minds. A major publishing house had offered her a 7-figure advance for a book about her approach to wealth management. But perhaps the most satisfying recognition came from her peers. Elena had been elected to the board of the National Association of Investment Advisors, where she championed initiatives to increase diversity and improve ethical standards across the industry. She'd also founded the Martinez Institute, a nonprofit organization that provided financial literacy education to underserved communities, particularly focusing on women and minorities who had been systematically excluded from wealth-building opportunities. During this period of expansion and recognition, Elena occasionally heard updates about Marcus through the industry gossipine. Blackwood Investment Group had been forced to merge with a larger firm after losing 70% of their client base. Marcus retained a managing director title, but his influence had been significantly diminished. The merger agreement included strict oversight of his client interactions after several complaints about his increasingly desperate sales tactics. Vanessa had filed for divorce 18 months after their wedding, citing irreconcilable differences. Industry insiders whispered about Marcus's drinking problem, his volatile temper, and his obsession with Elena's success. The man who had once commanded rooms with his confidence now seemed diminished, bitter, clinging to past achievements while the industry moved forward without him. Elena learned these details without seeking them out, and she felt neither satisfaction nor sympathy. Marcus had become a cautionary tale in their industry, a reminder of what happened when arrogance replaced adaptability, when ego superseded ethical behavior. His downfall served as validation of Elena's approach, but it no longer defined her success. The true measure of Elena's transformation became clear during a chance encounter at Lincoln Center. She was attending a benefit performance for the Metropolitan Opera, having developed a genuine appreciation for music during her years of solitude and self-discovery. Elena wore a stunning black gown designed by a young Colombian designer she'd discovered and now patronized. Her hair swept into an elegant chignon that emphasized the quiet confidence she'd cultivated. Marcus approached her during intermission, looking older than his 45 years, his face bearing the weight of professional disappointment and personal failures. He was alone. Apparently, his attempt to rebuild his social connections after Vanessa's departure had been unsuccessful. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying a humility she'd never heard before, "you look radiant." "Thank you, Marcus. How are you managing?" Elena's tone was genuinely polite, devoid of either warmth or coldness. She had achieved something remarkable. She could interact with her former husband without emotional charge, positive or negative. "I wanted to apologize," Marcus continued, his words rushed and rehearsed, "for everything, for not appreciating what I had, for the way I treated you, for not recognizing your intelligence and capabilities. I made terrible choices, and I've paid for them every day since." Elena studied his face, recognizing the sincerity in his regret. But she also recognized something else. This apology was as much about his need for absolution as it was about her deserving acknowledgement. The old Elena might have been moved by his admission, might have offered comfort or forgiveness. The new Elena understood that his guilt was his burden to carry, not her responsibility to relieve. "I appreciate you saying that, Marcus," she replied calmly. "I hope you find peace with your choices. If you'll excuse me, I see some colleagues I need to speak with." She walked away without looking back, joining a group of accomplished women who welcomed her with genuine warmth. Elena had learned to distinguish between relationships that energized her and those that depleted her energy. Marcus belonged firmly in the latter category, and she had no interest in revisiting that dynamic. The conversation did prompt Elena to reflect on her journey during the drive home to her Tribeca penthouse. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, devastated, financially vulnerable, socially isolated, questioning her own worth. That woman had believed her value came from supporting someone else's dreams, from being needed rather than being accomplished in her own right. The woman she'd become understood that true security came from competence, that genuine relationships were built on mutual respect rather than dependency, and that success measured by someone else's standards was ultimately hollow. Elena had discovered strengths she never knew she possessed, developed skills that surpassed those of people who'd underestimated her, and built a life that reflected her own values rather than inherited expectations. 6 months later, Elena received an invitation that crystallized just how completely her world had transformed. The White House Office of Economic Policy requested her participation in a task force on retirement security for American women. Elena would be joining Nobel Prize-winning economists, former Federal Reserve chairs, and other luminaries to develop policy recommendations for the president's consideration. As she prepared for her first meeting in Washington, Elena reflected on the irony of her situation. The girl from Queens who had once felt intimidated by Marcus's Ivy League connections was now being consulted by the highest levels of government. The woman who had been dismissed as intellectually inferior by her ex-husband was now recognized as a thought leader by the nation's most brilliant economic minds. Elena's recommendations to the task force focused on addressing systemic barriers that prevented women from accumulating wealth. Everything from gender pay gaps to caregiving responsibilities that interrupted careers. Her proposals were grounded in both economic theory and practical experience gained from managing hundreds of successful women's financial portfolios. The task force's final report, which incorporated many of Elena's suggestions, was praised by economists across the political spectrum and cited in major policy discussions for years afterward. Elena had not just achieved personal success, she had used her platform to create systemic change that would benefit millions of women facing similar challenges. Standing in the White House East Room during the task force's final presentation, Elena felt a profound sense of completion. She had not just recovered from Marcus's betrayal, she had transformed it into the catalyst for achievements she never could have imagined. The revenge she had once contemplated paled in comparison to the satisfaction of knowing she had built something meaningful, something that would outlast any personal vendetta. Elena Martinez had become exactly who she was meant to be. Not in spite of her struggles, but because of how she had chosen to overcome them. The ultimate revenge against those who had underestimated her was living so authentically and successfully that their opinions had become completely irrelevant to her joy. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.